Melanie Coleman was 20 years old, a junior at Southern Connecticut State University, and a recognized All-America scholar athlete. On November 8, 2019, she entered New Era Gymnastics in Hamden, Connecticut, for what should have been a routine evening practice. Coleman was not attempting a new skill or pushing for a harder routine. She was working through standard uneven bars drills, the kind she had performed countless times before. The gym was quiet, except for the familiar sounds of chalk, springs, and the low voices of teammates and coaches. At some point during her session, Coleman lost her grip or footing. Witnesses later described it as a sudden, ordinary fall. She struck the matting below, but the angle and force drove catastrophic trauma to her head and neck. The injury was immediate and severe. Paramedics responded within minutes, transporting her to Yale New Haven Hospital, one of the state's top trauma centers. She spent nearly 2 days in intensive care, surrounded by family and teammates, before dying from her injuries on November 10th. Connecticut's chief medical examiner, Dr. James Gill, ruled the cause as blunt injuries to the head and neck. The manner was accidental. Coleman's coaches and university officials emphasized her experience and discipline. She was not known for risky behavior or carelessness in the gym. Her accident happened in a controlled setting, under supervision, with established safety protocols in place. There was no experimental skill, no equipment malfunction, no warning that the next repetition would be different from any before it. The routine nature of the drill became the most unsettling detail. In the days that followed, shock turned into questions. How could a well-trained gymnast practicing a standard skill suffer a fatal accident in a modern, regulated facility? The NCAA and gymnastics community began to scrutinize the exact matting configuration around the uneven bars, the thickness and placement of landing mats, and the presence or absence of spotters for even routine skills. The specifics of Coleman's fall were not detailed in public reports, but the focus on routine exercise led to renewed debate about whether current matting standards offered enough protection, especially at the margins of the apparatus. University statements described Coleman as a role model, a student who balanced academic achievement with athletic excellence. Her death was not only a loss to her team, but a chilling reminder that even the most familiar routines in gymnastics carry unforgiving risks. In the aftermath, discussions about NCAA safety protocols intensified, with particular attention to how matting and spotting could be improved, even for skills that had always been considered safe. The memory of a promising athlete, lost during a simple drill, now hangs over every conversation about safety in collegiate gymnastics. Brijesh Yadav was 17 years old and already a national-level gymnast in India. On October 11, 2016, he walked into his gym in Agra, focused on perfecting the double front tuck, a tumbling skill that demands a rapid, tucked rotation forward, twice, before landing feet first. He had landed this move successfully 4 times that day. On the 5th attempt, something went wrong. As he launched into the air, witnesses said he lost his balance mid-rotation. Instead of landing on his feet, his body pitched forward and his neck took the full impact on the mat. The gym fell silent. Brijesh could not move. His coach, Arvind Yadav, called for help. Brijesh was rushed to a local hospital, paralyzed below the neck. The next day, he was transferred to Paras Hospital in Gurgaon, over 200 kilometers away, where Dr. Arun Bhanot took over his care. The medical team found that Brijesh's injury had damaged the upper spinal cord and the respiratory centers that control breathing. He was placed on a ventilator immediately. Dr. Bhanot later explained that in cases like this, 80% of patients do not survive the initial trauma. Brijesh made it through the first night, but his condition remained critical. Over the next several weeks, he underwent 2 complex surgeries. The operations stabilized his spine, but his body could not recover independent breathing. Infections set in. a common risk for patients on long-term ventilator support. Despite every intervention, Brijesh never regained movement or the ability to breathe on his own. After nearly 50 days in intensive care, he died in early December 2016. His accident drew attention not only because of the skill involved, but because of the setting. The gym in Agra lacked the advanced infrastructure seen in elite training centers abroad. The matting was described as soft, but there were questions about its thickness and placement. Indian media and former coaches pointed to a wider problem. The sport's rapid growth in India had not been matched by improvements in safety equipment, medical readiness, or coaching protocols. Retired coach Gurvinder Singh argued that Brijesh should not have been cleared to attempt the full double front tuck unless every step of his technique was flawless. The expertise paradox was clear. Brijesh was skilled and experienced, but one mistimed takeoff proved fatal. The medical struggle that followed only underscored the limits of emergency response in Indian sports. Brijesh survived longer than most with his type of injury, but the outcome was the same. His case became a rallying point for calls to upgrade gymnastics infrastructure, ensure better training for coaches, and place greater emphasis on emergency medical planning in every gym. In the weeks after his death, Indian newspapers published editorials questioning whether the country's new generation of aspiring gymnasts could be kept safe as the sport continued to grow. Michelle Maitland returned to gymnastics in April 2009, 7 years after leaving the sport as a child. At 19, she joined an adults class at Gymnastics Townsville, advertised as non-competitive and focused on fitness. Maitland had once been a level 6 gymnast, but her body had changed since her early training. She was now taller, heavier, and her center of gravity had shifted. On June 18, 2009, she was working through skills on the tumble track, a long, springy trampoline strip designed for tumbling practice. The tumble track is supposed to provide a forgiving surface for practicing jumps and flips, with a dismount mat at the end to absorb landings. That evening, the mat at the end measured 3.6 meters long, but beyond it, the exposed concrete floor was left unprotected. A floating safety mat, meant to cover this runoff zone, had been moved earlier in the night by another group and not replaced. Witnesses described Maitland taking her turn on the tumble track. She gained speed, launched into her final skill, and landed at the very edge of the dismount mat. The force carried her past the mat's end. She struck her head on the bare concrete. There was no second line of defense, no extra padding, no perimeter protection. The impact caused a catastrophic head injury. The coach, Robert Crane, heard the sound and turned to see Maitland lying motionless. Emergency services were called. Maitland was transported to Townsville Hospital, but the injury was beyond treatment. She died the next day, June 19, 2009. The Queensland coroner's inquest began in 2011 and delivered its findings in April 2013. The investigation focused on the gym's safety setup and supervision that night. The coroner found that the floating mat, which should have covered the concrete beyond the primary mat, had been moved for use at the vault and not returned. Testimony showed that mats were often shifted around the gym as needed, with no fixed requirement for continuous coverage at high-risk zones. The 3.6-meter mat was standard, but not enough to guarantee protection for adult gymnasts with increased power and momentum. The coroner concluded that Maitland's changed body shape, weight, and center of gravity after puberty increased her risk of overshooting the mat, something not accounted for in the gym's risk assessment. The inquest also examined supervision. The coach in charge was not watching Maitland's run. Another participant confirmed that the coach only turned after hearing the impact. There was no immediate spotting or intervention. Toxicology reports indicated the presence of cannabis in Maitland's system, which the coroner said could have impaired her coordination and judgment to an unquantifiable degree, but was not the primary cause of the accident. As a result of Maitland's death, Workplace Health and Safety Queensland issued a prohibition notice, halting use of the tumble track until a full risk assessment was completed. Permanent matting was later installed to cover all runoff zones, ensuring that no athlete could reach unprotected concrete. The coroner's recommendations called for fixed perimeter protection and strict protocols for mat placement, especially in mixed-age or adult classes where physical profiles vary widely. Maitland's case exposed a critical flaw. The system assumed existing mats and supervision were enough, but a single missing piece left a fatal gap. Her story became a case study in why every edge, every landing zone, and every transition between apparatus and floor must be treated as a potential hazard, because the margin for error can be no more than the width of a mat. Chris Fordham was 23 years old and ranked among Britain's best in double mini trampoline, or DMT, a discipline where gymnasts sprint, leap onto a small trampoline, execute aerial skills, and land on a crash mat. On February 18, 2006, Fordham entered the Jumpers Rebound Center in Gillingham for a training session. The facility was considered one of the most advanced in the country, with equipment and crash mats meeting the strictest standards set by British Gymnastics and the International Gymnastics Federation. The landing area measured 6 meters by 3 meters, the prescribed size for elite-level DMT landings. The safety zone was clear, the mats in position, and the apparatus inspected. Fordham was preparing for the European Championships. He had performed his routine safely hundreds of times before. That afternoon, he completed his warm-up, then began a round of full-power passes. On his third attempt, he launched into the dismount. Witnesses described a powerful takeoff, but something in his trajectory was off. Instead of coming down on the mat, he traveled beyond its edge, 2 full meters past the landing zone, striking the floor with his back and head. The impact was catastrophic. Coaches and staff rushed to his side. Paramedics stabilized him and transferred him to the hospital. Fordham was placed on life support, but scans revealed severe, irreversible brain damage. 9 days later, on February 27, 2006, his family made the decision to withdraw life support. He died that same day. At the inquest, Coach Nick Earle, with 25 years' experience, testified that he had never seen an athlete overshoot the landing zone so completely. The coroner, Roger Sykes, reviewed the facility's compliance: crash mats at regulation size and thickness, apparatus maintained, all standards met. Sykes concluded, Chris was an experienced and top-ranking international gymnast, but what he did was inexplicable and never seen before. The equipment was not at fault, and I'm satisfied this was a tragic accident. Fordham's accident forced a closer look at the limits of safety calculations for high-powered skills. The landing area, designed for the vast majority of cases, was not enough to contain the rare outlier, an athlete generating far more horizontal travel than expected. Even in a modern facility, with every box checked, the margin for error proved finite. The British Gymnastics chief executive called it a rare but tragic accident, emphasizing that even the safest environment cannot remove all risk when athletes push the boundaries of what is physically possible. Today, the DMT landing zone remains one of the most carefully measured spaces in the sport. Fordham's death is a reminder that for every routine that ends within the lines, there are scenarios, rare, unpredictable, where the athlete's speed and power exceed the system's limits. The question of how large a landing zone needs to be, and how to anticipate the unexpected, continues to shape safety discussions in gymnastics worldwide. Jordan Bond was 15 years old, a rising talent from Ohio, and one of dozens of athletes competing at the John McCready Flip Fest in Knoxville. On January 17, 2004, the Knoxville Convention Center was transformed into a maze of trampolines and competition floors. The 15-16 Junior Elite Trampoline event drew a crowd of families and coaches. the air thick with anticipation and the sharp scent of chalk. The apparatus bone-faced was standard for the meet, a competition trampoline surrounded by blue safety mats, with a perimeter set by temporary barriers and concrete floors beyond. Bone's routine began like so many before it. He mounted the trampoline, executed his opening skills, and prepared for the final series. Witnesses recall a strong takeoff, higher than usual. In a split second, his momentum carried him off course. He lost control mid-air. Instead of landing back on the trampoline bed or the immediate safety mats, Bone was propelled past the edge of the apparatus. He struck his head on the concrete floor just beyond the matting. The impact was immediate and devastating. Coaches and event staff rushed to his side. Emergency medical technicians stationed at the venue responded within moments. Bone was stabilized and transported to the University of Tennessee Medical Center, where he was admitted in critical condition. Over the next 2 days, he remained in intensive care, but the trauma to his brain proved fatal. On January 19, 2004, Jordan Bone died from his injuries. The accident's specifics were scrutinized in the aftermath. Reports confirmed the trampoline and mats were set up according to competition guidelines. The event perimeter, however, left a narrow margin between the apparatus and the exposed concrete. The force of Bone's bounce, combined with his trajectory, breached that margin, turning a calculated risk into an unthinkable loss. The timeline of those 3 days, routine, accident, emergency response, and hospital vigil, revealed how quickly a controlled environment can turn perilous when the limits of safety zones are tested. In 2006, a federal judge issued a ruling that would ripple through the gymnastics world for years. The case centered on a fatal accident at a sanctioned event, where every safety protocol had been followed, except for one detail, buried in the margins. The court examined not just the actions of coaches or athletes, but the underlying structure of liability in American gymnastics. At issue was the legal weight of participant waivers and the adequacy of perimeter padding around high-risk apparatus. The judge found that while waivers might limit claims against organizers, they could not erase the duty to maintain a safe environment. The ruling pointed directly at the exposed concrete bordering the competition floor, a hazard that had been overlooked in event planning, despite adherence to national guidelines. USA Gymnastics responded by issuing new directives on event setup. Facilities were instructed to extend padding beyond the minimum apparatus footprint, covering every possible runoff zone with crash mats or equivalent protection. The ruling forced a reckoning with the idea that compliance alone was not enough. The real test was whether every foreseeable risk had been addressed. Legal analysts summarized the decision in Sports Litigation Alert, noting that the precedent would influence not only gymnastics, but all youth sports where high-velocity landings are routine. The aftermath was felt at every level of the sport. Event directors began re-examining venue layouts, insurance carriers updated their policy requirements, and coaches received new training on hazard identification. The federal court's decision made clear that the responsibility for safety extended beyond the written rulebook. It was now a matter of anticipating the unpredictable and building a system where the next fatal gap would not be left exposed. Every case in this documentary unfolded inside regulated gyms or sanctioned competitions, not in unsupervised or rogue settings. Melanie Coleman's fatal fall in 2019, Brijesh Yadav's accident in 2016, and the deaths of Michelle Maitland, Chris Fordham, and Jordan Bone all occurred with certified equipment, trained staff, and established protocols in place. Yet each tragedy revealed gaps, whether in matting coverage, landing zone calculations, or emergency preparedness. Official inquests, like the 2013 Queensland Coroner's Report on Maitland, documented how inches of missing padding or a misjudged landing area could prove fatal. Some questions. such as the full effectiveness of recent rule changes or the number of near misses unreported, remain unanswered in public records. What the evidence makes clear is that gymnastics, despite growing safety standards, still carries unforgiving risks. Each life lost has led to policy reviews, revised guidelines, and renewed debates on athlete protection. The margin for error remains small, but every lesson written in these records has shaped the sport's ongoing pursuit of safety.